American Psycho, he's starting to distance himself from his party's worst ideas.
The unraveling of California Governor Gavin Newsom's pristine public image didn't come in the form of a single scandal. It wasn't a dramatic fall from grace or a headline screaming exposé. No, it came slowly, like a meticulously constructed set piece collapsing under the weight of its own pretense. A televised speech, a twitch of the shoulder, a smirk in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's all it took. And suddenly, Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld were there, sharpening their commentary like blades, ready to slice through the illusion. What followed wasn't a simple takedown. It was a cultural autopsy of a politician built in a lab of virtue signaling and media gloss, performed by two of the sharpest scalpels in public discourse. The scene begins with Governor Newsom standing in front of a backdrop of destruction, burnt-out neighborhoods, the remnants of lives once full of warmth, laughter, and memory. Thousands of Californians had just lost everything in the state's latest round of devastating wildfires. And there he was, smiling, talking about speculators and land development plans, like he was prepping a pitch for investors at a tech conference rather than addressing a state in crisis. Not once did he falter. Not once did his eyes reflect the gravity of the pain behind him. Instead, Newsom, ever the showman, moved his shoulders with an awkward glee.
Newsom, a guy who hates fossil fuels but could still bring down the price of gas by wringing out his hair,
cracking a grin that made more people feel cold than comforted. And Joe Rogan noticed. So did Greg Gutfeld. Together, they pulled the thread that had been hiding in plain sight. Gavin Newsom isn't a leader, he's a performance. Rogan, the cultural juggernaut who escaped California like it was a failing simulation, didn't hold back. Sitting behind his podcast mic, his voice carried the kind of gravitas that only comes from personal experience. Nobody wants President Newsom, Rogan said bluntly, his tone more disappointed than angry. And in that single statement, he captured what so many Americans were already feeling, that this man, cloaked in charisma and coated in slick political varnish, was more hologram than human. Newsom wasn't just critiqued for his image, he was exposed for his hypocrisy. This was the same governor who enforced some of the harshest lockdowns during the pandemic, mandating masks and business closures with all the cold authority of a bureaucratic overlord. And then he was caught, maskless, indoors, dining at the French Laundry, the exclusive restaurant where most Californians couldn't even dream of making a reservation. While parents buried their heads in their hands over remote learning and shuttered schools, Gavin was toasting wine glasses with lobbyists and elites, pretending the rules he crafted weren't meant for him. Greg Gutfeld didn't just point this out.
Once proclaimed that his state would be a sanctuary to all who seek it.
He lit it on fire and laughed as it burned. He looks like a politician manufactured in a Westworld lab, Gutfeld quipped. All hair gel and hand gestures, no soul. That was the vibe. Not just that Newsom was ineffective, but that he was a construct. A product. An AI-generated sketch of leadership. The man who smiled while talking about rebuilding fire-ravaged communities, who danced on stage while constituents suffered, who launched a podcast to improve his brand image while families were still sifting through ashes. The wildfires were the tipping point. Over 16,000 homes and properties destroyed. More than $200 billion in estimated economic losses. And yet, Newsom's response was more about PR than prevention. Critics didn't have to dig deep to find the irony. He had cut fire prevention budgets in the years leading up to these disasters. His administration ignored controlled burn recommendations and failed to clear dead brush and flammable overgrowth. These weren't just natural tragedies. They were policy failures dressed up as acts of God.
You can't, it's not his words when he speaks.
Yeah.
You have to watch him closely.
So when Newsom stood before the cameras talking about land use and housing redevelopment, Rogan saw through it. A lot of those people didn't even have fire insurance, he reminded his audience. Because the companies pulled out. They saw California as too risky, too unstable. The numbers backed him up. Nearly 70% of fire insurers had pulled back coverage in the state, citing unmanageable risk and poor state mitigation. Gavin hadn't just presided over a tragedy, he helped make it possible. And still, somehow, he was running victory laps on camera. That's what triggered the crossover nobody expected. Joe Rogan, the long-form podcast philosopher, and Greg Gutfeld, the late-night snark machine, found themselves united, not by politics, but by a shared sense of disgust. Newsom wasn't leading. He was play acting. And worst of all, he was getting away with it. Until now. Gutfeld's satire cut deep. He mocked Newsom's media worship, his Vanity Fair glamour shots, his carefully curated Instagram captions that looked more like lifestyle influencer posts than political updates. He governs like he's trying to win Sim City on nightmare mode, Gutfeld joked. But it wasn't just a punchline. It was a eulogy for the California dream, once the land of opportunity, now a cautionary tale of what happens when branding overtakes substance. While Gavin smiled into the camera, Californians fled. Not just average citizens, but entrepreneurs, tech innovators, creators, and business owners. Elon Musk moved Tesla operations to Texas. Joe Rogan moved his entire empire out of LA and into Austin. And it wasn't because they hated the beach. It was because California became unlivable, not in theory, but in daily reality. Soaring taxes, crime-infested downtowns.
And some genius decided not to film him any lower than the shoulder.
Yes, did you? Yes.
So
Homeless encampments next to five-star restaurants. Drug needles on school routes. And Gavin's answer? More buzzwords. More policies that sounded great in speeches but failed in execution. Go electric, the state cheered, right before telling people not to charge their cars after 4 p.m. because the power grid was too weak. They banned gas stoves, but half the population cooked by flashlight during rolling blackouts. Newsom wasn't solving problems. He was putting up pretty signs in front of a collapsing building. Even when Rogan and Gutfeld addressed Newsom's national ambitions, their tone shifted from critique to concern. He's thinking of running for president, Rogan said, almost incredulously. The same guy who turned Malibu into Mad Max wants to scale it nationwide. Gutfeld agreed, comparing the idea to franchising a restaurant that just failed its health inspection. Sure, the sign's pretty, he added, but the kitchen is infested and the Yelp reviews are written in flames. The frightening part? They're not wrong. Newsom's national image is still propped up by legacy media that romanticizes his speeches, overlooks his contradictions.
what did he do?
You couldn't see the hands.
No, but he sent Morse code.
Yes.
Go back and watch it. Look at the blinking. Blink, look. Meet me at the house.
And continues painting him as the golden boy of progressive politics. But Rogan's platform, the Joe Rogan Experience, has reached beyond any cable network. Over 100 million monthly listeners. And Gutfeld's late-night show pulls higher ratings than Fallon, Kimmel, and Colbert. These aren't niche voices. They are the new media giants, and they just aimed their spotlight on Gavin's cracks. The synergy between them was accidental and organic. Rogan laid out the failures in policy, the human toll, the exodus of real people who couldn't afford to stay in the place they once called paradise. Gutfeld swept in with a cultural X-ray, dissecting the image, the aesthetics, the absurdity of Gavin's cleanup before Xi Jinping's visit. The governor's excuse? When you have company over, you clean up the house.